I often ask people if they're afraid of death. It looks like they haven't really meditated on death.
If you say, I know I'm going to die in some vaguely unspecified future moment, that's still death denial, because you're saying, yeah, not me, not now. We need to realize your death can happen at any given moment.
What is the role of death and fear of death in life?
Well, the uniquely human awareness of death and our unwillingness to accept that fact, we would argue, is the primary motivational impetus for almost everything that people do. So when I first read The Denial of Death, I was so literally flabbergasted by it. In The Denial of Death, where Becker just says it in the first paragraph, I believe that the terror of death and the way that human beings respond to it or decline to respond to it is primarily responsible for almost everything we do, whether we're aware of it or not, and mostly we're not. And so I read that first paragraph, Lex, and I was like, wow, okay, this dude...
You're onto something.
You're onto something. And then it reminded me, I think, when I'm 8 years old, the day that my grandmother died. And, you know, the day before, my mom said, oh, say goodbye to Grandma. She's not well. And, okay, so I was like, okay, Grandma. And I knew she wasn't well, but I didn't really appreciate the magnitude of her illness. Well, she dies the next day. And it's in the evening, and I'm just sitting there looking at my stamp collection. And I'm like, wow, I'm going to miss my grandmother. And then I'm like, no, wait a minute. That means my mother's going to die. And that's even worse. After all, who's going to make me dinner? Then I'm looking at the stamps, all the dead American presidents. And I'm like, there's George Washington. He's dead. There's Thomas Jefferson. He's dead. My mom's going to be dead. Oh, I'm going to get old and be dead someday. And at 8 years old, that was my first explicit existential crisis. I remember it being, you know, one of these blood-curdling realizations.
On this podcast, I often ask people if they're afraid of death. I almost always get criticized for asking world-class people, scientists and technologists, and about the fear of death. It looks like they haven't really meditated on death. I guess the question is, what is the role about bringing that terror of death, fear of death to the surface?
Most problematic and unsavory human reactions to death anxiety are malignant manifestations of repressed death anxiety. You know, we try and bury it under the psychological bushes, and then it comes back to bear bitter fruit. If you want to become a more mature individual, according to Kierkegaard, you got to go to the school of anxiety. You have to really think about that. You have to think about it and feel it. You got to let it seep into your mind, at which point, according to Kierkegaard, basically you realize that your present identity is fundamentally a cultural construction. You didn't choose the time and place of your birth. You didn't choose your name. You didn't choose necessarily even the social role that you occupy. You might have chosen from what's available in your culture, but not from the full palette of human opportunities. We need to realize that we've been living a lie of sorts. What Kierkegaard says is that death anxiety, most people don't go to the school of anxiety. They flee from death anxiety by embracing their cultural beliefs. Kierkegaard says they then tranquilize themselves with the trivial. Right? Heidegger says the same thing. He says, look, most culturally constructed meat puppets do is to be frenetically engaged with their surroundings to ensure that they never sit still long enough to actually think about anything consequential. Heidegger says there's another way, though, to come to terms with that death anxiety is to realize that not only are you going to die, but your death can happen at any given moment. So for Heidegger, if you say, I know I'm going to die in some vaguely unspecified future moment, that's still death denial because you're saying, yeah, not me, not now.
Yeah.
Heidegger's point is you need to get to the point where you need to realize that I can walk outside and get smote by a comet. Or I can stop for gas on the way home and catch the virus and be dead in 2 days. Or any number of potentially unanticipated and uncontrollable fatal outcomes.
There've been moments in my life when I really thought about death. I mean, there's not too many, like really, really thought about it. I feel like it's a dangerous thought because I feel like I'm taking a step out of society. Like there's a nice narrative that we've all constructed.
You are.
And I'm taking a step out and it feels, there's this feeling like you're basically drowning. I mean, it's not a good feeling.
It is not. And so now Kierkegaard says, well, here I am. I have shrugged off all of the cultural accoutrements that I have used to define myself. And now what am I or who am I? At this point, Kierkegaard said, you're really dangling on the precipice of oblivion. And some people tumble into that abyss and never come out. On the other hand, Kierkegaard said that what you can now do metaphorically and literally is to rebuild yourself from the ground up.
Just thinking about death and meditating on death, it's an enlightening way to live life.
Albert Camus said, come to terms with death. Thereafter, anything is possible.